Hi, I'm Jim. Welcome to the Light and Sporty Guy channel and my super professional recording studio here, or no, we're in my disaster area known as a shop. Okay. Um, I want to talk about the MOSAIC proposal that just came out from the FAA. And I will point out right now that I'm working from a copy that I downloaded on July 23rd, 2023. So between now and when you see this, there may be some significant changes. And certainly by the time the rule is approved, anything I have in here may be completely wrong. So probably just stop watching and go find something that covers the actual regulations. MOSAIC is a modernization of special airworthiness certification, a major update of the current sport pilot LSA regulations, and much to my surprise, it appears to be happening in my lifetime. So, yeah. The motivation for this video is I've seen several people here and there referring to, oh, gee, this is 3,000 pounds and 250 knots as a summary of what we're allowed to fly under the sport pilot rules. No. No, not even close. Neither one of those numbers is relevant to the question, what can I fly as a sport pilot or as a private pilot without a medical? Okay. The 3,000 pounds appears all over the preface and explanation of what they're doing and why, but it's not actually in the regulations. Okay. There is no gross weight limitation anymore. None. It's gone. 250 knots is a limit on aircraft that are certificated under the LSA category, but it is not a limitation on what sport pilots can fly. And this difference is possible because the definition of LSA has been removed from Section 1.1, and there are separate definitions covering what can be certificated under the SLSA, ELSA rules, and what can be flown with the sport pilot privileges. There's a lot of overlap, but they are not identical. Okay? So the new primary limits on the aircraft are a clean, flaps up stall speed of 54 knots, calibrated airspeed, maximum of 4 seats, 1 passenger maximum, and you're just not going to find an aircraft that stalls at less than 54 knots without any lift enhancing devices that can still go 250 knots and weigh 3,000 pounds. It's just not going to happen. So anyhow, in this video, my focus is going to be on the what can I fly as a sport pilot or private pilot without a medical under these proposed rules. I'm not going to get into the changes in aircraft certification or changes in maintenance just because I don't think that's quite as interesting to the larger audience, and I don't want to make this video that terribly long. Anyhow, and as I mentioned, what I'm talking about is a copy that I downloaded July 23rd, 2023, so it could have changed since then. Let's get on to it. Again, the limits on gross weight used to be 1320 pounds for land, 14 something for sea. The maximum speed at sustained maximum power, those are gone. The FAA is relying on the stall speed and the number of seats to keep things in control. So I'll quote this. A maximum stalling speed or minimum steady flight speed without the use of lift-enhancing devices, VS1, of not more than 45 knots calibrated airspeed, except for airplanes, which must have a VS1 speed of not more than 54 knots calibrated airspeed at the aircraft's maximum certificated takeoff weight and most critical center of gravity. So the previous limit was 45 knots for everything. So for airplanes, think single engine land, single engine sea, they're bumping it up to 54 knots. The 45 still applies to weight shift and gliders along with the 2-seat requirement. But the increase to 54 knots calibrated airspeed and the 4 seats open up a lot of aircraft up to about a Cessna 172, I think. I did a quick look at some of the stall speeds quoted, and I think the 172 squeaks in. It's tough because you need to have the calibrated airspeed, not true airspeed, not indicated, and at low speeds, high angle of attack, indicated and calibrated really separate. Calibrated being the airspeed corrected for instrument errors and for instrument errors and for the location of pedostatic probes, which can be pretty significant at those low speeds. So when you're looking through your pilot operating handbook, you got to be sure what kind of airspeed you're looking at before you decide that you can or cannot fly a particular aircraft. Also gone from the requirements is the rule requiring a single piston engine. So this allows for electric power if you want to build your battery-powered light sport aircraft to fly across the parking lot. Go for it. It also allows turbines, small turbines. The FAA notes that small turbines are being used as launch engines in gliders and things like that. So you could potentially make a turbine-powered aircraft and fly it under your sport pilot ticket. The word single went away, and that allows for a multi-copter type aircraft. Think quadcopter type drones, okay? But I'm pretty sure you're not going to get into a conventional twin-engine aircraft. Well, you can't as a sport pilot, because sport pilot only get single-engine land or single-engine sea category or class sign-offs. But if you're a private pilot or better with a multi-engine rating, you're still out of luck, I think, because they add the requirement, quote, the loss of partial power would not adversely affect directional control of the aircraft. That pretty much rules out your Twinkies and your Aztecs and things like that, even if they met the stall speed requirements. One loophole that I can think of would be a centerline thrust. If you had a centerline thrust twin with a low enough stall speed and only 4 seats, and a multi-engine rating, but you don't have a medical, so you're flying under the sport pilot rules, I think that's a loophole. We'll see. That's probably something the FAA will address. If I were to guess, somebody's going to point it out to them before they write the final rules, but something to think about. There is, in theory, helicopters that fall under the light sport aircraft and sport pilot eligible aircraft, but they have to have the simplified control systems. These are systems that, quote, could use a joystick or steering wheel and push-button controls subject to certain requirements, or a touchscreen interface that greatly reduces the piloting skills necessary to fly the aircraft, end quote. Yeah, so that's not your conventional collective and cyclic controls and the rudder pedals, and you got to be a 6-armed monkey to keep that thing stable, you know. Smarter Every Day did a great video on how hard it is to fly a helicopter, by the way. It's kind of fun. I'd recommend it, and if I think of it, I'll put a link down in the description. Oh, and I will also put a link in the description to the proposal that I'm working from, so you can check my work. And they also say that when you're flying these things with the simplified controls, that does not count towards any higher certificate. Another new capability, or 2 new capabilities, if you hold a sport pilot certificate, you may act as pilot in command of an airplane that, since its original certification, has retractable landing gear or a controllable pitch propeller if you've met the training and endorsement requirements specified in 61331. Before, you used to be just out of luck with that. Retractable gear was allowed in gliders and amphibious aircraft, but not single-engine land. And the controllable pitch propeller was actually something of a gotcha. Say, for example, a Taylorcraft, generally considered eligible for sport pilots. But if you found one that sometime back in the 50s, somebody had installed a 2-speed electric propeller, which was not that uncommon, and, you know, flew it for a while, and then it's been gone for 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, who knows. Once that propeller was installed, the aircraft itself was no longer light sport aircraft eligible. You know, everything about it now is like it was built, but it doesn't meet the continuously since original certification. So that was always a got you. I think this solves this problem because we've taken away the definition of light sport aircraft and moved it over in another part of the regulations. And the requirements for pilots, say a fixed pitch propeller, or training if it has a controllable pitch propeller. And if it had a controllable pitch propeller in the past and it's gone, then it's gone. And I think this fixes it, but I'm not sure. It would be nice to get some clarification from the FAA about that. And if you want to comment on this proposal, that would be a good question to ask him, I think. One little thing is that you can now use 2.5 hours of simulator time and have it count towards your certificate when you're training, assuming, of course, you have an authorized instructor and it's approved simulator. You know, not a huge deal, but hey, save you a couple bucks. And the final thing I want to touch on is nighttime operation. So you can act as pilot in command with a sport pilot certificate during night operation if you have the training and quote, either hold a medical certificate issued under Part 67 of this chapter or, provided the pilot holds a valid U.S. driver's license, meets the requirements of 6123C3, which is basic med, and conducts the operation consistently with 61113I, again, that's basic med. If you are satisfying this by meeting the requirements of 6123C3, if there is a conflict between the requirements of this section and 61113I, this section controls. So this is a little carve out here for those who have a sport pilot certificate, an actual sport pilot certificate, and a medical or basic med, which requires a medical. Because if you have a private or whatever and you have a medical or basic med, then you're not operating under the sport pilot limitations, so this is pretty much irrelevant. But what's bugging me about this, there's something that's just, I'm not seeing it, I'm not clear, this stuff about if you're satisfying this by meeting the requirements of 6123C3, if there is a conflict between the requirements of this section and 61113I, this section controls. Well, two questions. If there's a conflict, I'm not sure why the FAA would write it that way. And the other one, when they say this section, I assume they're talking about 61329, where this word came from, or are they talking about 6123C3? It's not super duper clear to me. It'd be nice if the FAA could clarify that somehow. And if you have some thoughts on that, throw them in the comments. If you have thoughts on this whole proposal as it's laid out at the moment, obviously you can comment for the next 92 days, 93 days from the date of recording here. I'd have to go back and look. You can comment directly to the FAA and they'll at least print your comments in the Federal Register. Whether they pay any attention or not is another story. But anyhow, that's what my takeaway on what can I fly as a sport pilot or private pilot without a medical. And I hope you found it interesting, and I'll catch you on the flip side.